From the very beginning of human history, whispers have haunted the edges of our collective memory. Whispers of hidden rulers, unseen forces, cosmic jailers who do not govern with armies or crowns, but with deception, ignorance, and chains made of light itself. Ancient texts describe them with a name that chills the soul: the Archons. Who are these beings? Are they gods, demons, or something even more sinister? Guardians of a prison so vast that humanity does not even recognize the walls. Tonight, we journey into the forgotten scriptures, the forbidden teachings of the Gnostics, and the mysteries of the soul's captivity, to uncover the truth about the Archons, the jailers of the human soul. The story begins not in the temples of Greece or the courts of Rome, but in hidden scrolls buried deep in the sands of Egypt. In 1945, in a place called Nag Hammadi, a farmer stumbled upon clay jars sealed for nearly 2,000 years. Inside, he found the Gnostic scriptures, texts long thought destroyed by the early church. Among them was the chilling revelation of the Archons. According to these writings, the Archons are not of this world. They are cosmic parasites, born of a false god, the Demiurge, a being who created the material universe not as a gift of love, but as a prison of deception. The Demiurge, arrogant and blind, believed himself to be the only god, but he was merely a shadow, a counterfeit ruler. From him, the Archons emerged, shapeless forces of control, whose one purpose was to keep humanity enslaved. But how do you enslave a soul? Not with iron chains, but with illusions. The Gnostics taught that the Archons weave reality itself into a web of lies, binding humanity through false religions, corrupt rulers, endless desires, and the ignorance of our true divine origin. They are described as the rulers of the spheres, presiding over the seven heavens, each layer another veil between the human soul, and the ultimate source of light, the true God beyond all gods. To the Gnostics, the human soul was a fragment of divine light, a spark of eternity trapped in flesh and matter. And the Archons? They were the wardens of this prison, ensuring that when we die, our souls remain bound to the cycle, reincarnating again and again, never escaping the material cage. It was the ultimate captivity, one not of the body, but of the eternal essence within. And yet, the Archons were not invincible. The texts reveal that their power thrived only in ignorance. The moment a soul remembered its true origin, the moment it awakened to its divine spark, the Archons began to lose their grip. This was the great heresy of Gnosticism, that salvation was not through blind obedience or ritual, but through gnosis, knowledge that you are more than matter, knowledge that you are not a prisoner, but a fragment of the infinite. But who or what are these Archons really? Were the Gnostics describing metaphors, symbols of human ignorance and corruption? Or were they warning us about something real, entities that exist beyond the veil, watching, feeding, manipulating? Some descriptions portray them as shadowy figures, their forms incomplete, like abortions of creation. Others compare them to reptilian beings, soulless and imitative, capable only of mimicking life, but never truly creating it. Their power, the texts say, is imitation. They cannot originate, but they can twist, corrupt, and counterfeit. Think of every false system of power that has risen on earth. Empires built on blood, rulers who claim divinity, systems that demand worship while keeping people in ignorance. The Gnostics believed these were not human inventions, but the fingerprints of the Archons at work, whispering in the minds of kings and priests, pulling the strings of history like puppet masters behind the curtain. But the Archons do not only exist in dusty manuscripts. Their echoes appear across cultures and ages. In Persian lore, they resemble the Devas, demonic forces of deception. In Christianity, they mirror Paul's principalities and powers of the air. In Islam, some see them reflected in the jinn, invisible beings who influence human thought. Even in modern conspiracy theories, the Archons re-emerge, described as parasitic intelligences feeding off humanity's fear and division. If the Archons are real, then their prison is not made of stone walls, but of perception itself. Consider the world we live in today. Endless distractions, false idols, political chaos, religions twisted into tools of control, and technologies that captivate more than they liberate. Are these merely accidents of human civilization? Or are they the latest strategies of the Archons, the jailers of the soul, ensuring that humanity never looks inward long enough to remember its true divine nature? The Gnostics believed that awakening begins with resistance, that every act of awareness, every rejection of illusion, weakens the Archons' chains. But awakening was not easy. The texts speak of the Archons as masters of deception, able to infiltrate dreams, manipulate emotions, even cloud the mind with false visions of light. They could appear as angels, as guides, as gods, anything to keep the soul from escaping. And yet, there were ways to resist. The Gnostics spoke of passwords, secret knowledge, spiritual armor that allowed the soul to pass through the 7 spheres at death without being detained by the Archons. They taught mantras, symbols, and practices meant to pierce the veil. But more than anything, they taught vigilance, that the true God was not in the temples of stone, nor in the edicts of priests, but in the quiet flame within the human heart. The Archons thrived on fear, but the awakened soul carried a weapon more powerful than fear: remembrance. The remembrance of its origin, its purpose, its connection to the infinite. To remember was to break the spell. To awaken was to rise above the jailers. But if this is true, then the question becomes, are we still in their prison? Are the wars, the divisions, the endless cycles of corruption merely human failure, or the continued influence of the Archons? If they are indeed the rulers of the age, then our struggle is not merely against flesh and blood, but against forces that have ruled unseen since the dawn of time. Perhaps this is why the story of the Archons still resonates today. It is not merely a myth, nor a forgotten heresy. It is a mirror held up to every system of power that enslaves, every illusion that blinds, every whisper that keeps humanity from remembering what it truly is. The Archons may be jailers, but the question that remains is whether we will remain their prisoners. But to truly understand the Archons, we must step even further back into the myth of creation itself, as told by the Gnostics. Unlike the Genesis we are familiar with, their version is far stranger, almost alien. It begins with a divine fullness, a boundless source called the Pleroma. Within it resided countless emanations of the true God, spiritual beings called eons. Among them was Sophia, wisdom herself. But Sophia, in her longing to know the unknowable Father, reached beyond her place. In her daring, she generated a flawed creation without the harmony of her counterpart. From this act came forth a being unlike the others, imperfect, arrogant, and blind. He would come to be known as Yaldabaoth, the Demiurge. This Demiurge believed himself the only God. He declared, "I am a jealous God, and there is none beside me." But the Gnostics tell us this was the great lie, for he was not the source, but a shadow. From him came the Archons, his offspring, his servants. They built the material universe as a counterfeit reflection of the true spiritual realms. To the unawakened, this world feels solid, permanent, real. But to the Gnostic mind, it was an elaborate construct, a cosmic labyrinth designed to keep humanity asleep. And yet, Sophia did not abandon her mistake. Out of compassion, she placed within humanity a spark of the divine, a secret seed that even the Archons could not extinguish. This was humanity's hidden advantage, the treasure buried within clay vessels. It meant that even in a world of deception, there was a chance of awakening. This is where the story becomes more haunting. The Gnostics warned that the Archons feared humanity because within us lay something greater than themselves. the potential to surpass them, to reach the divine source they could never touch. And so their strategy became clear: to distract, to divide, to corrupt, to keep humanity busy with shadows so it would never discover the flame inside. Think about this in our modern age. Endless screens, addictive pleasures, unending wars, political distractions, even distorted teachings that demand blind obedience rather than true understanding. If you look closely, you begin to see the pattern. It is as if something does not want humanity to awaken. Something profits from our ignorance, our despair, our endless cycles of suffering. But the Gnostics did not only speak in cosmic terms. They described the Archons as active presences in human life. They whispered in rulers' ears, steering empires. They crept into dreams, planting false visions. They could even imitate spiritual experiences, dazzling seekers with counterfeit light to trap them in yet another illusion. Their greatest weapon was deception dressed as truth. And this raises a terrifying possibility. What if the very structures we trust, governance, religions, even philosophies, are in some way touched by archonic influence? Not created entirely by them, but twisted just enough to keep humanity bound? To the Gnostics, this was not mere paranoia. It was reality. Consider, too, how the Archons were described. Some texts depict them as reptilian, cold, and mechanical. Others describe them as insect-like or shadowy, lacking true form. Always imitative, never original. They cannot create life, but they can corrupt it. They cannot kindle the divine spark, but they can smother it beneath layers of fear, guilt, and illusion. This strange detail finds echoes in myths around the world. In Sumerian lore, we find the Anunnaki, sky beings who manipulated humanity for their own purposes. In Christian tradition, we find Satan masquerading as an angel of light. In Hinduism, we encounter the Maya, the grand illusion veiling truth. In each case, we see a reflection of the same idea, that unseen forces weave a net of deception, and only the awakened can break free. But the question we must ask is this: if the Archons exist, why are they so invested in humanity? Why guard us so fiercely? Why watch us so closely? The Gnostics gave a startling answer: because humanity carries something they do not. That divine spark, that fragment of eternity, is unique. The Archons, born of the Demiurge, have no connection to the true source. They envy us. They fear us. And so they seek to enslave what they cannot possess. This struggle was not only cosmic, but deeply personal. Every soul, upon death, was believed to encounter the Archons. They would stand as gatekeepers, demanding answers, challenging the spirit, trying to drag it back into the cycle of flesh. To escape them, the soul needed secret knowledge, spiritual passwords that proved it remembered its divine origin. Without this gnosis, the soul would be thrown back into another body, the prison of matter renewed. Imagine the terror of such a belief, that even death was not freedom, but another turn of the wheel, unless you awakened. Life then became not about wealth, power, or ritual, but about remembering. Remembering what you truly are, and refusing to bow to the illusions of the jailers. But what of today? Are the Archons still at work, unseen but ever-present? For some, they are simply metaphors, archetypes of corruption, greed, and blindness that plague every age. But for others, they are real. Real in ways we can scarcely imagine. They are the force behind tyrants, the whisper in the heart of corruption, the veil that clouds the human mind. And perhaps even now, they watch, content that most will never awaken. And yet, throughout history, there have always been rebels. The mystics, the prophets, the sages who saw through the veil, those who taught dangerous truths, who spoke of inner light, who refused to bow before false powers. Many of them were silenced, condemned, or killed. Yet their words echo still, faint reminders that the Archon's grip is not absolute. Could it be that even now, in our age of chaos and noise, the same struggle continues? That humanity stands at a crossroads where the choice is either deeper entanglement in illusion or a mass awakening unlike anything before? The Gnostics would say yes. They would say the Archons have tightened their grip, but also that the spark within humanity grows restless, ready to break free. But perhaps the most unsettling idea is this: the Archons may not be confined to myth or ancient visions. Some modern thinkers suggest they could be at work in ways that align eerily with our technological age. If the Gnostics were alive today, they might say the Archons no longer hide in temples or clouds. They hide in algorithms, in screens, in the hum of machines that quietly shape our lives. Consider how much of our reality is now filtered. We live in a digital maze of endless images, updates, distractions. Our attention, the very currency of our inner life, is captured and sold. Every notification pulls us away from presence. Every feed buries us deeper in illusions crafted by unseen hands. Is this not archonic in essence? A system that thrives on keeping the soul distracted, enslaved by shadows flickering across a screen? And yet, this interpretation need not be limited to technology. In psychology, Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, the hidden parts of the self we deny, repress, or project. Some scholars have connected the Gnostic Archons to this very idea. They are not only external jailers, but internal ones. The voices of doubt, fear, anger, jealousy. These too are Archons, whispering from the depths of our psyche. When we act blindly, ruled by impulses rather than awareness, it is as if the Archons steer us from within. This brings us to another chilling perspective. What if the Archons operate not by force, but by consent? What if every time we choose ignorance, violence, or greed, we strengthen their grip? In this way, the jail is not locked from outside. It is reinforced from within. Humanity, unknowing, becomes the builder of its own prison, brick by brick, choice by choice. But the ancient texts did not leave humanity without tools. Gnostic sects described ways to resist the Archons. Through meditation, sacred chants, secret words, and symbolic rituals, they sought to pierce the illusion. More importantly, they believed in direct knowledge, gnosis, a remembering of the divine spark within. Once you know you are more than flesh, more than a puppet of fate, the Archons lose power, for they thrive only in ignorance. It is fascinating, too, to note how similar practices arise across cultures. In Buddhism, practitioners seek liberation from samsara, the endless cycle of birth and death, guarded in some traditions by terrifying beings who test the soul at the threshold. In Egyptian lore, the dead face a trial, their heart weighed against the feather of Mat. In Christianity, Paul spoke of principalities and powers of the air, forces that sound hauntingly like the Archons. Are all these traditions speaking of the same jailers, the same cosmic opposition, just under different names? And then there is the question of UFOs and alien encounters. Some researchers point out that ancient descriptions of the Archons, shadowy, reptilian, mechanical, sound startlingly similar to reports of extraterrestrial beings in modern times. Could it be that what people experience as abduction or contact are actually manifestations of these same entities, cloaked in forms that fit the fears of each age? The parallels are disturbing. Both the Archons and many alien accounts involve manipulation, loss of free will, and experiments upon humanity. Is this mere coincidence, or is the same phenomenon wearing new masks? In conspiracy circles, the Archons are often linked with hidden elites, secret societies, or global systems of control. The idea is not that these groups are the Archons themselves, but that they may serve as human proxies, vessels through which archonic influence spreads. When greed, deception, and power dominate the world stage, it begins to resemble not human error alone, but a calculated design. And yet, for all the fear these ideas inspire, there is an empowering thread woven throughout. The Archons are not invincible. The very fact that we can name them, describe them, and tell their story is itself a rebellion. For they are beings of imitation, not originality. They cannot create the divine spark, they can only obscure it. And every act of awareness, every moment of awakening, chips away at their power. Still, one cannot ignore how deep their influence may run. Look at the cycles of history. Empires rise, empires fall, wars erupt, peace dissolves. Humanity learns, then forgets, then repeats the same mistakes. To the Gnostic mind, this is not random. It is the Archons at work, keeping the wheel turning, ensuring the prison remains intact. What we call history, they might call maintenance. And yet, the Gnostics also believed in rupture. That one day, in one lifetime or another, enough souls could awaken to tilt the balance. That even the jailers would tremble at the thought of humanity, remembering its origin. In this way, the myth of the Archons is not only a warning, but a challenge. A challenge to see through the veil, to test every authority, to doubt every illusion, to look deeper than what is presented. But if this is true, then the most important question is not, do the Archons exist? But how do we live if they do? Do we surrender to distraction, or do we fight to awaken? Do we bow to fear, or do we recognize that fear itself is the chain they place upon us? In every choice lies the potential to strengthen or weaken their hold. And so, perhaps the tale of the Archons is not merely an ancient myth. Perhaps it is the story of humanity itself, the story of every soul struggling to break free from unseen chains, fighting not only external forces, but the inner voices that echo their commands. A struggle as old as time, and one that continues even now, in this very moment. From the shadows of ancient texts to the whispers of modern theories, the Archons stand as one of the most haunting enigmas in human imagination. Were they gods, demons, rulers of illusion, or the very architects of our prison-like reality? To the Gnostics, they were the jailers of the soul, the ones who blinded humanity to its divine origin. To philosophers, they became symbols of ignorance and fear. To mystics and rebels, they were the adversaries that could only be defeated through knowledge gnosis. We followed their story across cultures and centuries, from the secret scrolls hidden in caves to the visions of prophets, from the battles of empires to the quiet struggles within the human heart. Each perspective adds a new layer. Each voice echoes the same warning, that humanity lives under forces it cannot always see, and that freedom is never given. It must be fought for. And perhaps that is the greatest truth of all. The Archons are not only myth, not only external beings, but reflections of the very struggles we face every day. The systems that distract us, the powers that divide us, the shadows within that whisper, we are nothing more than flesh. Their prison is not built of stone, but of belief. Their chains are not iron, but ignorance. Yet the flame of the divine spark endures. It whispers that we are more, that we carry within us something the Archons cannot touch. And in that spark lies both the warning and the hope that every act of awareness, every moment of awakening, tears a hole in the veil and reminds us of the freedom we were born to claim. So the question remains, are we prisoners or are we sleepers about to wake? The Archons may still loom, but perhaps their greatest fear is that one day humanity will finally see through them and step beyond the bars of the illusion they built.